So you said there at the end that we're all in the work of developing children. And I have this experience, I'm sure we all do more and more. Last weekend I was on my own bacheloring it, and I was out for breakfast solo, and I observed a dad with his 8-year-old son, and the dad was looking at his phone the whole time and never interacted with the kid except to help him eat his food. So,
didn't you want to just go over there and start talking to him?
well, I actually struggled with that, and I was thinking about trying to come up with an empathic way to do that. And I decided not to do it. I do the counter sometimes in the grocery store when I see someone who's actually letting their child help them shop as opposed to sitting in the cart and looking at a phone. So I'll make the positive comment. But do you have any thoughts about what we do to be in the work when we observe that?
Yeah, I think that's a tough situation. I think it's a lot easier to do positive reinforcement. I told a story about a little girl in the grocery store last year. Do you remember the story? Yeah, and anyways, you know, when a parent is doing a good job out in public, I think it's very appropriate to say something like, you know, I'm a behavioral pediatrician and I just want to compliment you on what a great job you're doing parenting. I think that's a great thing to do. In my office, I frequently unpack the dangers of excessive technology for children and how it impacts their brain, their behavior, their relationships. And the dad that you saw in the restaurant is really a limited responding dad, isn't he? He's checked out. His priority is his phone, not his child, and that's really sad. But I think it's hard in public to actually go out on a limb. I mean, who knows what they're going to do, you know?
Have a lasting impact.
And have a lasting impact. They might feel offended by that or whatever. I think in an office setting, it's easy for me to actually talk about that and give them some really important feedback on that. And that's why I have signs up in my rooms that say, no technology allowed. And it's funny because I walk in the room and the parents are like, okay, I'll put it away, you know. And I'll take things away from kids all the time. And you know, I'll go in on a 6-month checkup and the baby's sitting in front of an iPad on the mom's lap and she's on her phone. And I'll just say, you know, this is really not how parenting should look for a 6-month-old. You need to be engaged, in their face, reading books, playing, talking, engaging. You should not let them look at screens. So I'm known as the anti-technology pediatrician in Arizona, and I'm pretty straightforward with that. And the residents are like, I could never say that in the office. And it's like, well, you can. And you are somebody who knows the consequences, so it's really important for you to understand that and let other people understand it too. That's a great question, though. Other questions?
I work at a federally qualified health center, and we deal with a lot of parents who are foster parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, you know, a lot of family members who it's a blended family or there's limited access to, you know, the intact mom and dad. And technology is a big issue. But the bigger one that I see for us is parents who don't know how to deal with their own emotions, anger, frustration. They'll come into the room and you're right, they're very frustrated. We have a pile of paperwork for them to fill out before they can even see me. And then you walk in and the child's hungry, they're tired, they're crying, they're screaming, the parent's embarrassed. You know, so it doesn't bring out the best in us. And so we hear a lot of yelling at their children or be quiet, I'll have them give you a shot. So I don't know if with your experience and all, we are merged, we're a federally qualified with behavioral health. So we have a BH counselor, but we also try to have accessible, and I know it sounds awful, but in the exam room, I'll usually bring in fruit, water, colors, something to color, and I'll immediately engage with the child and start to get them to color. I'll ask them if they're hungry. I don't care if they're eating a banana on the exam table, so they can calm down, and then I can turn around and focus on the parent. But some of the things that we've tried to do are to give parents those tools when they leave that, like you said, failure is expected, anger, you know, these emotions that children have are just as normal as joy, and to help them maybe just some tools to learn how to deal with anger and anger management. We've done some deep breathing exercises with the children, and we do it side by side with the parent to try to help them learn that technique, which is just a simple, cheap tool that they can do. But I don't know if you have any other techniques or tools that you've found through the years that are helpful so that when they leave, they feel empowered, that they have some control over, life.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I'm sure most everybody in the room has experienced a very similar thing. Thank you for that question. I think one of the things you mentioned is modeling for the parent in the room how to do parenting better, and I think that's really important. So in our clinics, we teach our residents to engage with the kid. I mean, if they're 3 or more, or whatever. Usually 2-year-olds are not happy, and anybody under that can't talk very well. But so if a kid is 3 or more, really engage with them. We hand out books at every well child visit, and sometimes the residents will actually start reading the book to them, and it's really a process of modeling for this parent who's on their phone to, get off your phone and engage with your kid. I think mindfulness training is very good, and I think kids, even at an early age, 4 or 5, can really learn that and benefit from that, and that helps get their dysregulated emotional system to be regulated. I think deep breathing is great. I use an app, or I recommend an app called Headspace. Have you ever heard that? And it's really good. And I actually use it sometimes too, because it's like a 3-minute deal, and like chaos in the morning, chaos in the afternoon, I got 5 minutes for lunch, and I'll wolf that down in 2 minutes and I have 3 minutes on my app. So I think technology isn't all bad. I think there's things that technology can be used, especially today. You're going to have to maybe use technology to train people like that. I give a lot of handouts with the messages, for example. I talk a lot to parents, especially on my intake behavioral clinic. I get a good 40, 45 minutes with them and really unpack their parenting and try to see where their responsiveness level is at. I like to see kind of how their kid is attached to that and how their kid is dysregulated. And so I spend a lot of time talking about stress and dysregulation and how to get out of that. And I think the emotional container concept is so important for parents to remember. They have to be the ones who are the calm ones, okay? And many times I see parents, it's like, no wonder this kid acts the way they do. Ding, 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 just constant talking and negative and stuff like that. And I've actually had situations where I've excused the preteen or the teenager out of the room after the first 10 minutes, and I'll turn to the mother and say, you just need to shut up. No, honestly. I said, do you realize the last 10 minutes you said nothing positive about your 10-year-old son? And did you see his physical stature, his, how he was handling that? He was slumped over. He was disengaged. I said, sometimes parents just need to shut up. And then usually the tears come out. And usually they go, I know, my life is so stressful. And, well, let's unpack that and see if we can get you some help too, and then figure out how to parent this child in a better way that's going to help them, okay? I'm kind of lucky, though. I got a lot of gray hair, so when I say things like that, I can kind of get away with it. My residents, when they're with me and I say something like that, we get out of the room and they go, oh my gosh, you told the mother to shut up. And I said, yeah, I did. Well, she needed to. That's the truth. Go ahead.
We talked earlier about affirming our children, and I think anybody who has a daughter knows that there is a difference between the male and the female. Mm-hmm. I was raised with the belief that if you don't validate your children at home, they're going to look for validation somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So how do we keep from going overboard when we're dealing with girls? Because girls, they have a lot, television, the standards of beauty, those things are impressed upon girl children more often than males. Mm-hmm. So there is a real difference in affirming your male child and affirming your female child. Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts on how, because I know in any case, you can over-affirm your children, but as far as beauty standards and you're beautiful, or, how can you go from just completely going left and going overboard. Because if you don't give them enough, then there's self-esteem issues, and then if you give them too much, we're talking about resiliency issues. So,
yep, I think that's a great question, and I think it really has to do with affirmation needs to be accurate, true to what the reality is. So I would say with a teenage girl, I remember our own 2 girls growing up, and you're so right, there's just this crazy double standard about women's beauty and what that means, and it's just a sick state of our country and really the world. But I think instead of, for example, I think the words you choose are really important in your affirmations. If your child doesn't feel like they're beautiful, or maybe more of an average kind of looking person, constantly telling them you're beautiful, they're going to say, well, that's not true. I don't believe that. Do you know what I mean? They're not going to believe something that they themselves don't think is true. But when you say to your child, I love you and I think you are a lovely person, I think you are a wonderful person and I like how you look, that's very different than using the word beautiful or whatever. So I tell parents, if you don't know exactly what to say, don't say anything until you know, okay? All right? So don't just kind of spiel out a whole accolade of affirmations when they may not be completely true. So we want affirmations to be there, but we want them to be accurate and we want them to be true to the situation. And I think typically girls require a little bit more sensitivity in the words that you choose compared to boys. We have 1 boy and 2 girls. And Luke, we could say, great tournament today, Luke. You played great. Yeah, thanks. But with the girls, you had to kind of say, unpack kind of what they were feeling first, but not get in too deep in the weeds either. Okay? All right?
I don't think there's anyone in here who believes they have ugly children. So
no, and if your child is ugly,
it's the most beautiful girl in the world. So.
Right. But if you do have an ugly child, don't say that to them. Okay? I'm just saying.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, there are ugly kids. So I was the staff and faculty and staff in the nursery last week, and there was really an ugly baby, okay? The baby was, the baby was kind of transverse and breech, and the head was all like, meh, and the eyes were like bug out and puffy, and it was just like, didn't have any hair, so it looked, And we walked in the room, and the parents were happy and, are falling in love and all that kind of stuff. And I did the checkup and everything was fine. I said, your baby is very, very healthy. And then I walked out to the room and I said to the resident, that's a face only a mother could love. No, I didn't say that. Okay, question.
So you mentioned in terms of resilience that connecting children with something that's larger than themselves, instilling a sense of hope, and basically that's directly correlated with their ability to deal with adversity and hardship. Mm-hmm. Just wondered if you could share a little bit about, any specific techniques or ideas that you have in relation to how to help parents do that and kind of what that looks like in your clinical practice.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it has to do with something we call linear thinking. When parents are over-focused on the outcome of something down the road, rather than kind of, as Kyle Maynard talked about, taking the next few feet of dirt in front of him and getting past that, okay? And so I think it's really important for parents to not talk 10 years from now necessarily, but to talk, how are we going to deal with this now? And how is this experience going to teach you about being resilient so that the next time something similar or even unconnected comes up, you have some abilities and tools in your toolbox to handle that. And so I think that kind of language is what's important for parents or therapists or teachers to talk about is, we don't know what 10 years is from now, but let's talk about this next semester in your math. You got a D last time. How are we going to work on that together? And how are you going to put in the effort to make that a C or a B? That type of thing. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
We see a lot of our children referred for mental health services. But one of the things that we've been seeing a lot of here in the last few years, even more, is grandparents raising the children, what are you seeing the same kind of things? And is it therapy, of course, would be different with grandparents because they're in a whole different generation?
They are.
I mean, we got 70, 75-year-olds raising preschool, middle school kids.
And 5 of them, yeah.
6, 7 of them.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just a lot. So what kind of therapy, I mean, what are...
Yeah, I think grandparents need some extra assistance in this because, like you say, they come from a different generation that did things differently. I had a really neat kid come in. This was about 4 months ago. I've seen him 3 times now. Parents not involved because of drug and chemical dependency issues. Recent move with grandma to Arizona. And the kid is completely out of control. He's got an ACE score of 8 at the age of 4. He's seen and witnessed, you can't even imagine what those things are. And the grandmother's like, how do I handle this kid? And so she was there with the boyfriend, and I started talking to them about the impact of adverse childhood experiences on child's behavior and regulation. And the boyfriend started to cry because he went back, he's 70 years old, he went back into his childhood, and then the grandmother cried with him because she thought of all the things that she went through. And I said, here's the deal. We're going to have to work with you to become the parent figure for this young man. And they were so receptive to that. And I just went through as much as I could in that 45 minutes. And they came back 3 weeks later, and he was already, they said, 50% better. And we kept working on that. And then the 3rd visit, a month after that, he was 80% better. So grandparents need a lot of training, and frankly, so do parents. They need to understand what is their job, how do they do this, and I also tell parents with a really mess on their hands, I say, oh, well, how is this working for you? How you're parenting them right now? How is that working out? Okay, and I know that sounds like a really kind of in-your-face question, but not one time have they answered, oh, it's working really good. No. They're there to get help. And so I think it's really important for parents to know if they're doing something, parenting in a way that isn't working well, they have to learn a different way to do it. And so that's kind of what I feel my job is. Thank you. All right, everybody have a wonderful day.